Welcome to the New Discovery Christian Podcast, where you'll find Bible messaging and sermons that will encourage, uplift, and challenge you to a godlier life. Join our community and become inspired to continue living a God-directed life.
Welcome again to the New Discovery Podcast. I'm Kyle as your host, and I got Parker, my co-host, and I got McKinley, co-host today with us, and we got a good discussion about the topic is going to be what I wish I knew before my first relationship. So we're specifically talking about dating kind of scenario, what we wish we knew. So we're going to kind of just dive in from what we know in our experiences. If we can think of some concepts when it comes to the Bible and how that can apply, or some principles, we'll kind of try to dive into that. And as usual, this will be a part one. So we will also have a part two. So stay tuned for that. So, but here we go. We're going to kind of just jump in when it comes to the conversation. So I'll kind of go ahead and just kind of start us off when it comes to this conversation, warm up the engines. So for me, at least, when it comes to, if I think about what I wish I knew before a first relationship, the first thing that I can think of, at least, is maybe, because you're saying it's the first relationship, like the first one ever kind of deal. And what I can think of, at least, is I think before you start any relationship, you get kind of excited and you kind of have like that zone. It's something that's new. It's a new person. But like, if it's the first time ever, this is like the first time that's ever happened. So there's like another bit of special like excitedness, I guess, that I can think of. And so I don't think it's a danger necessarily, because it always kind of happens with the first relationship. You're just going to get kind of excited at first. But I think with the first one that I can think of is not taking those emotions and like taking them too far, I guess, is what I can think of, and not thinking, oh, I'm so excited. This means that this relationship is going so great kind of thing. And that like, there's nothing wrong with the relationship. This is a not that they're not a fantastic person, but I think you can over-evaluate the relationship, I think, to such a degree to where it's like, this is like perfect. And it's like, oh, there's no need to date someone else. Like this can be it kind of deal, especially at first. And I think you can live in kind of that fantasy kind of world, I think, a little bit too much. And I guess if I'm talking to myself from the past, I probably would have took myself aside and been like, all right, man, I know you're excited about this. You're dating and you like her. And I may need to back up slightly and you do like this person, because I did date people before the one that I'm thinking of, but I'm going to be honest, I didn't like them. So that's maybe something for another day, but I wasn't really excited about it. I dated them, but I didn't really like them. So it was like, I don't know, whatever. That's not really what I'm talking about. Mine is like, this one's like kind of serious, I guess, if that makes sense. So I guess I'm defining it like that. This one's kind of serious, and it actually lasted a good bit. And I would say this one lasted about a year, whereas the other ones were like a month. So, take that as someone will. And I would just been then like, hey man, I know you're all excited and everything like that, but realistically, while you're excited and everything like that, wait until the emotions kind of die down a little bit. And when that happens, realize that you are overlooking certain things in this person, and that's going to happen over time, and you're going to kind of see the real person as the person kind of, they get upset. What do they look like when they get angry? What does it look like when they get disappointed? What do they look like when their dreams fail in their life? What does it look like when you disappoint them eventually, or you make mistakes? And I'm going to be honest, no one is impervious from sin. We don't want to live a sinful life, but what happens when you sin, when that eventually happens? Like, how do they react to those things? Do they act in a mature way or a non-mature way? And like, how do you act, whether it's each one of those kind of deal? And I would say kind of be prepared for that moment, and that's when the rubber meets the road kind of deal right there. And don't be still on those fumes of that kind of excitedness to where you're like, oh, I'll just overlook this. That's not a part of this. And kind of like in this unreality kind of thing. Enjoy the beginning of it, because I think the beginning of every relationship kind of has that. I think from what books that I've read, they call it the honeymoon phase or whatever. That's what they term it. So I'll just say that just so everyone knows what I'm talking about. Like, there's always that bit, but I would say in the first one, you may think that that's what it's always going to be about. And I would say, well, let me back you up. The reality is eventually going to set in, and you need to get practical with certain things when that happens, and how to tackle it. And then if you can't tackle it, well, then what do you do in the relationship? How do you negotiate with this person? And if you can't, you probably need to leave. And I would say that's one thing that I had learned in the first one that was serious. I would say that I had learned, because I knew the relationship. If I had known that earlier, the relationship would have ended way earlier. And it was prolonged at least 2 to 3 months longer than it should have. Whereas, and if I had looked back and known what I know now, it would have ended 3 months earlier. It would have ended on a better note as well, for both of us. And it wouldn't have ended on, I don't want to say a bad note, because nothing catastrophic really went down, but it definitely was like, well, I knew it definitely needed to end, but with her, I kind of kicked the can down the road, and I think that's where I made a mistake, was where she was like all down for this, and then when I dropped the hammer down like that, she did not expect it, and it should have been done much cleaner, I can think of, 3 months earlier, whereas I left a little damage to her, I think damage control 3 months later when I did it like that. So, because I think we were going to break up, and then I was like, oh, no, we can work it out. But I knew when I said that later on, I was like, I was still in this fantasy. Maybe we could get back to that. And then it didn't happen. And then the reality really set into me, and it became a burden to me. At that point, I was like, because by the time I got rid of the relationship, it was like, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. And I was like, yeah, I shouldn't have done that and kicked it 3 months later. You should have just ended it right there when you were in the conversation about it, and just, it would have been best for her, would have been best for you. Now it's like, you're really good, but she's not really that good, and you left some damage there. And I was like, I wish I hadn't have done that. So for me, that's the initial thing I can think of, is that kind of thinking when it comes to that first relationship. Because then when I jumped into the next one, learning that was extremely helpful to me, knowing that dynamic kind of happens at first and then it changes and morphs. And I definitely ended the second one when it needed to end. It went on a little bit, but we're talking maybe like a week or something like that. But a week is not comparable to 3 months of when I kind of knew. So that's the first thing I can think of. But how about you, Parker?
Yeah, I mean, I like what you said right there at the start, where you're talking about we kind of, when we get in our first relationship, or really in any relationship at the beginning, we kind of have these rose-colored glasses. So, and I don't know who needs to hear this right now, okay, but you're not in love, right? Let's just kind of put that out there.
Yeah, good point.
And the reason I say that is because, like you were saying, it's like we have these emotions that usually come with a beginning of a relationship. But love isn't just purely an emotion. Now, it can lead to emotion, but I like what Paul says, and this is a very famous, 1 Corinthians 13. It's known as the love chapter. But just looking at verses 4-7, he says that love is patient, love is kind, and is not jealous. Love does not brag and is not arrogant, does not act unbecomingly, it does not seek its own, it's not provoked, does not take into account a wrong suffered, does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices with the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. And he goes on to say more, but one thing that, well, I'll say this just to kind of, and then I guess we can come back to commenting on some more things. You said a lot of great things, I thought. But one thing that I hear this a lot, and this is, I mean, I feel like we all do this to an extent in high school. But talking with some youth and stuff, one thing you'll hear, and I hear this with guys. I don't know if girls do this. McKinley, maybe you can bring this up or speak to it. But this idea that in order to get a girl, like one tactic is to make her jealous, right? Like you hear that a lot. And that it makes me cringe when I hear that because one, it's not biblical. I mean, literally he just said, right, like real love it's not jealous. And there's a verse in Proverbs, it's 20, I'll just read it real quick. It's 27 verse 4, where it says, wrath is fierce and anger is a flood, but who can stand before jealousy? Now you might think, well, but doesn't God get jealous, right? So isn't there there's some areas where it's okay? But keep in mind, the reason God gets jealous is because, or when you look at the moments where it speaks of God's jealousy, is because the person that, or usually it's when we're rebelling, right? But the reason he's jealous is because he wants the best for us. And the best for us is not found in sin and unrighteousness, which is why he saves us from it. But when we're making people jealous, or we really want the best for them, or we want the best for ourselves, right? Because we're trying to get them to like us, and we're trying to put us out there as like, oh, well, we're this like great person. We can get all these girls or guys if it's a girl from a girl's perspective. And therefore, because we're this like, I don't know, I guess rare commodity, whatever you want to call it. Somehow that makes us worthy of being loved back, but that's not what true love is, or at least according to Paul. So that would be my initial thoughts on, at least on a first relationship.
Yeah, I've got a few bookmarks mentally what you just said, but Kinley, we want to pan to you. What are your initial thoughts after kind of getting the conversation cooking?
I think that you're definitely right. That is like a tactic that I've seen probably throughout like high school, and it baffled me because there was never a moment where it turned out pretty. Like there was never a happy ending to those relationships. It was always like you laid that foundation out to like manipulate the person that you were in a relationship with, and that wasn't a good foundation because it was based solely on manipulation and distrust. Okay? It was based on whoever you're with comparing themselves from the get-go to the person that you were just trying to make them jealous with, and it was childish and immature, and it never worked. And I never understood why it kept going. Like it didn't make sense to me. But it was kind of like an automatic red flag whenever I would see like, oh, well, I was at this like game or whatever, and he was with that other girl, and now it comes out that he's dating this girl now, and I was like, I don't see that working, but maybe. And it never did. But that vicious cycle continued over and over again. So, but I liked what you were saying about the rose-colored glasses and the honeymoon phase, because that was my first relationship, but prolonged like 2 years. Okay, this was my first relationship, and I was so excited about it. So of course, like I was young, and I really, really wanted, of course, like a boyfriend, and you want like somebody because everybody else has it, and that's at that age, that's kind of the big thing that everybody starts talking about. But mine wasn't like a bad experience. Mine is still like, he's my best friend, and we went to church together, and that's how we met. And we like served together. We had the same friend group. We worshiped together. We prayed together. Like it was a really good first relationship, and definitely like better than I've seen like some have, like, the middle school relationship where it's like, oh, he said he likes me, and now we dated for 2 weeks, but now he's into Jessica, my best friend. And it wasn't like that. Like we really were like really close friends for years and years, like growing up. And then once we kind of hit our teen years, we were like, oh, like maybe we should date. And of course it didn't really work out. Like we just figured, hey, we're best friends, and that's pretty much it. But we were together for 2 years, and we stayed in those rose-colored glasses almost. Like we never really saw faults with each other. It's like we both, in a way, we both put on perceptions of what we wanted the other to see in us. So like he never got angry around me, okay? Which granted, it should be noted that we were both still very young. Like we were like 15, 16.
Yeah.
And I think we started being friends when we were like 12, like really, really young. And then we started dating when we were like 14. It was our first relationships. He actually wasn't allowed to date yet. So it was like definitely his like first even interaction and a new experience for everybody. And it ended up working for 2 years. We never fought. We never like got angry with each other. And we just both put on these like almost rose-colored glasses of each other. So like in church, all of our friends were like, oh, well, y'all are just so perfect and y'all just are so great and y'all are just like, y'all get along so easy. And I was like, well, one, because neither one of us can drive, so we only see each other like twice a week. That's kind of the main point. We don't see any of the ugly sides.
Yeah.
But also it's just because we loved each other as like best friends. And so that's why we never saw like ugly parts of each other. And after that, like I was like 16, I'd just gotten into high school. It was my sophomore year. And that's kind of what I thought all relationships were supposed to look like, was like, oh, I'm just supposed to be this perfect person for this person. I'm supposed to look perfect. I'm supposed to act perfect. I'm supposed to, like, all of my mannerisms and behaviors and emotions are supposed to specifically fit what they want. And that was probably the worst mentality that a girl can have in high school, was that she needs to look and act and be a certain way for a relationship. Like, looking back on that, it was probably the worst thing for me, not the first relationship, but my perception of everything felt like it had to be perfect because that's what everybody made it out to be, you know? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
And so down the road, it ended up really like not being healthy for me because I didn't know that I was supposed to be authentic, that I was supposed to communicate and be honest and be true to myself.
At this moment, we're gonna cut from part 1 and we're gonna move into part 2, and then we'll continue the conversation because I got something I'm gonna say in response to what Kinley just said, because that's the good meat and potatoes right there, I think, to continue the conversation. So thank you for jumping in with part 1. We're gonna continue the conversation into part 2. So join us for that part 2.